35 years ago, an engine was recovered from the English Channel by a fishing boat. Back on shore, it was quickly identified as belonging to an aircraft. But no one knows which aircraft it had come from, where it had crashed, or if the rest of the aircraft is still there.
One of the most versatile aero engines of the Second World War, the Rolls Royce Merlin. Over 160,000 of these were built, and they were used in a variety of aircraft, from fast and agile fighters to big 4-engine heavy bombers. In fact, so many were built, it's almost impossible to go to an air show today without hearing one of these start up.
With the amount of Merlins that were used during the war, it's no surprise that they're often found buried at crash sites, or, like this one, at the bottom of the sea.
This particular engine just turned up on the doorstep, brought on the back of a lorry, and it was from a fisherman who had obviously caught his nets in it and was so fed up, I suppose, over fishing the area many times and tearing nets apart that he thought once for all he'd get out to sea and do something with it. And therefore we know nothing about the engine at all. But the important thing now is to try and find out really where did this engine come from, who was flying behind it, and about its history.
What we want to do is establish where the engine has come from, which aircraft, and the story behind it. To help us identify the engine, we've recruited the help of Tony Dyer from the Air Defence Collection.
That will obviously help us. It is an early engine, various bits tell me that.
Right.
The blocks, for instance, are single-piece blocks. Unfortunately, that one's quite corroded on this side.
Okay.
But if we look on this side of the engine here, which is quite difficult to get to.
That's all right. Squeeze through it. Hold on.
But when you look here, these are single-piece blocks.
Ah, right. Okay.
Or heads, as it were. So the heads and the where they're mated to the crankshaft.
Right. And when you say early, what sort of age is that?
So that would have been from right up to about 1942, basically. All the early Merlins had this gallery as well fitted to them. The other thing that makes it quite an early or relatively early engine is the sump and how the sump is made here. Obviously, you've got the maker's plate here, which is good. Which it says it's a right-hand tractor,
right,
which is good. So
okay.
That will help us as well, because obviously you had left-hand turns and right-hand turns.
Right. That's relating to the prop, the way the prop's spinning.
Indeed, yes.
Right.
I personally don't think it's. I think it's a bomber engine. That's
Right.
my own personal thoughts about it.
Well, potentially, if this is a bomber engine, Lancaster or Halifax, then there's the story of the crew, the men behind this, 7+ men behind this, which might not be known.
No, indeed.
So what do we know? Well, we know that it's a Merlin engine, and we know it was found somewhere off of the south coast, possibly around the Solent area. Down the side of the engine, just about here, is the maker's plate. Now that gives us a little bit more information. It tells us that it was made at the Rolls Royce factory in Glasgow, and the batch was delivered in 1942. On the front of the engine is parts of the propeller or the air screw, and down the side are bits of the engine mounts. Now these pieces could be critical in identifying which aircraft this engine came from.
We do know that this type of Rolls Royce Merlin, the Type 20, was fitted to several different types of aircraft, these being Hawker Hurricanes, Bolton Pool Defiance, Bristol Beaufighters, Avro Lancasters, and Handley Page Halifaxes. From the first inspection, Tony thinks it may be from a heavy bomber, a Halifax or Lancaster, but it could be from any of these aircraft. 12 cylinders configured in a V formation, displacing 27 litres and delivering over 1,000 horsepower. The Merlin was developed from a line of Rolls Royce aero engines dating back to the First World War. The first production models appeared in 1936. Immediately, the potential of the design was recognised, and it was subsequently installed in the Spitfire, Hurricane, Lancaster, Mosquito and Mustang, to name just a few of the Merlin-powered aircraft. The V12 configuration allowed for a low frontal area, which was more aerodynamic as opposed to a radial engine. This gave aircraft designers the ability to create more streamlined and efficient fuselage shapes. One downside was the engine needed to be liquid-cooled and therefore required a radiator, which was vulnerable to attack. The design of the Merlin was so versatile, it also ended up powering fast patrol boats and tanks. In fact, a few eccentrics have even installed them in cars. Due to the design of the carburetor, early versions of the Merlin often cut out when pulling negative G. This was initially cured by the introduction of a flat washer which restricted the fuel flow. This effective solution was designed by a female engineer called Beatrice Schilling and became affectionately known as Miss Schilling's orifice. Our next job is to remove the fishing net and see if we can find any other clues.
So just go back up a bit and watch nothing slips. Okay. And again. And again.
So, yeah. What was the best way? I don't know, you sort of... I don't know where to put your hands, do you? Okay, here we are.
Years of salt water has made the engine unstable and difficult to handle.
Yeah, we want to be able to keep it as original as possible in the condition in which it was found. So to actually have it completely tangled up like this in the middle of the netting is actually a wonderful thing, you know. So if we can keep it like this, then so much the better. But for the purposes of our investigation, of course, we do need to have a bit of a closer look. So any gentle untangling that we can do to uncover some bits here and there would be very useful.
I can sort of tell from the condition on the inside, the rocker cover certainly came off in impact.
Oh, do you reckon so?
Yeah.
So this is,
if you look at where the oil galleys all are along here, they've got concretions on them from being in the seawater.
Right, we're free.
Yes.
We're free on that bit. Now, this is definitely holding a piece of aeroplane on here.
While Tim and Chris are studying the engine, I've received a strange message.
It's 6:15 in the morning and we're at a clearing in the New Forest. The reason is, a couple of days ago we got an email from a guy called Dave who's found out there in the mudflats on the Solent a large wheel, and it looks like a large wheel off of an aircraft. Bearing in mind that we're looking at the possibility that our Merlin engine may be from a bomber, then there's a slim possibility this may be from the same aircraft. All I've been told is bring wellies. Right, okay, now, do you mind? Do you mind? These are my... Right. Look, I didn't sign up for this. They said it was going to be glamorous.
Once the tide gets low enough...
Dave Lee is a former RAF engineer who spends his free time hunting the mudflats around the south coast. His finds include old bottles, cannonballs, and on occasions bits of aircraft.
Great, all right. And you've done this before a few times?
Yes, just a few.
Excellent, right.
Got no problems, you're in safe hands.
Good stuff. Now, you told me to wear a hat because it was going to be sunny.
Can't get everything right.
Good stuff, right. Raring to get going.
This is a real long shot. But could this wheel be from the same aircraft? It's not uncommon for a wheel to remain inflated after an aircraft crashes in water. After a while, as the rest of the aircraft decays, the wheel may free itself and float to the surface.
You bump into many people out here?
Negotiating the mudflats is a dangerous business. We have a short window while the tide is out. The mud is deep, and we can't afford to get stuck.
Bit of Andy cam now. Dave has left me and he's disappeared off in that direction. He's left me on this shingle bank, basically because it's taking too long for both of us to try and get through this mud. It's so thick. Now Dave knows what he's doing, so he's gone off and he's going to go and find the wheel, and hopefully he's going to come back with some footage of that. In the meantime, I'm left here on this shingle bank. We're fighting the tide's coming in, so it's important that he gets out there and does that now.
But through the mist, Dave reaches the wheel. The measurements and the positions of the nuts on the hub confirm this is a complete wheel and tyre from a British heavy bomber. So now we have two substantial pieces of aircraft. Are they connected? After a shower and a change of clothes, I meet up with Tony and Chris to see if they've got any further with identifying the engine. I also want to challenge Tony's theory that this engine is from a bomber and not a fighter.
Off the engine. Have you got any further, any more numbers or anything we can?
Well, I think we did a fairly good job of actually uncovering the engine. You know, that was a task in itself because it really was, you know, fairly well covered up. But having taken it all away, although we were uncovering bits where numbers should have been, we didn't find a single extra number. We found nothing but corrosion all over it, I'm afraid.
And what about the air screw? Anything around the propeller?
The propeller itself was, again, very, very corroded. But we did take some measurements off that, and we may be able to get some kind of extra information.
But no numbers.
No more numbers, I'm afraid, no.
Right, so engine mounts. Tony, what's your thoughts on engine mounts?
Normally the mount was made by the same people who made the aircraft. It's our biggest way of being able to narrow down which aircraft type it will be fitted to.
So every engine mount, so the engine's fun, but the engine mounts are different for all those different fuselage shapes and those different.
Yeah, essentially they are.
So we've only got a few bits of engine mount on there, but from what we know from that, do we think it might be Hurricane?
No, basically this is one that we made earlier, as it were.
Oh, right.
So this is actually a mount from a Hurricane.
Oh, right.
And this is from a Mark II Hurricane, which would have been fitted with a 20 series Merlin. So we're talking about exactly the same type of Merlin would have been fitted to it. It's a little bit chewed, but you can see straight away the differences between the remains that's on the candidate, the actual engine, to this. So you'll see with this, you've got these shiny fish plates.
Okay.
Hawker Hurricane, the whole of the aircraft was made of steel tubes for the fuselage, and then wherever you had a joint, you had stainless steel joints.
Right. Okay.
So straight away you can tell when we look at the engine from the sea, it's a welded construction. So what you've got here is this is your rear mount. Mm-hmm. So on the Merlin you've got 4 mounts. You've got 2 at the front, 2 at the back. This is the rear mount. And where you're holding that there, that's where the front engine feet would go.
Great. Yeah, and that's quite different, isn't it?
Very much so.
Right. So we know it's not Hurricane.
Definitely not Hurricane.
Possibilities of Defiant?
We've looked at photographs of the Defiant, and it's not the same again. It's again, that was made by Bolton and Paul.
Yeah.
And was an item made by them for their aircraft.
And so we're steering down towards heavy bomber, which was your initial thought, wasn't it?
Yeah. So when we look at the heavy bombers, we're looking at things like the Lancaster and we're looking at the Halifax. Now we know that a lot of Halifaxes were made with radial engines, and we know some, particularly in the early parts of the war, were made with Merlin engines. But we also know that they had wooden propellers and not hydromatics.
Ah, right. So
process
of elimination.
Yeah.
This is going to be a Lancaster engine?
Yes, I would say so.
A milestone in our investigation. Thanks to the 2 remaining pieces of engine mount, we can confirm that this engine was fitted to an Avro Lancaster, a 4-engine heavy bomber used extensively by the Royal Air Force during World War II.
So what about my adventures in the mud and my wheel, which I'm determined to get in here, considering how muddy it is. So this is it.
This is a fairly substantial piece of debris you've got here. I think the whole thing is what, sort of 5 feet across, is that?
Yeah, it was huge. I could see it in the distance when we were out there. And we've got we see it on there. So that's where the main wheel, isn't it, off the Lancaster?
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the condition of the hub, that there's actually anything left there, because they were magnesium alloy, and what tended to happen was they would corrode away.
$1 million question. Do you think this wheel could possibly be linked to the engine?
I don't think so. Sorry to sound that way, but
it was a long shot, but
the thing
I had to get muddy for a reason.
yeah. Well, and I think it's worthy. I think it's worthy of recovering it, quite honestly, because I'd love to see it. You know, if it was stabilised and everything else, it'd be good. But you can see that someone's cut the slot in there.
Yeah, we did notice this. Yeah.
So there's an additional use that it's been put to.
Oh, so it's not something that's necessarily come down and crashed in the ocean. Somebody's reused that wheel.
Right. Oh, okay. Yes.
So it's quite possible that this wheel is not in fact something that came from a downed bomber at all. I mean, it came from a bomber, and not necessarily one that was shot down.
It could be an aircraft. So it could be. It's the right sort of style for a Second World War aircraft.
It goes to show you, though, what is around still left over from the Second World War. The fact that we've almost stumbled across this wheel. And we've got an engine, and they are from a similar type of aircraft. It's amazing.
It shows the scale of the war. So many decades afterwards, that we're finding substantial pieces of war machine lying around that we can try and piece it together. Yeah.
Wherever you go around the country, you'll find bits and pieces. But to find a wheel in that condition is pretty impressive.
Well, that's poured cold and salty water on my theory that these two pieces of aircraft are connected. But the wheel on its own is a great find and worth getting muddy for.
We started with an unknown engine, an engine that had been salvaged from the sea. We now know that this is a Merlin 20, built in Glasgow in 1942 and fitted to an Avro Lancaster, possibly a Lancaster Mark I. At some point, that aircraft crashed into the sea. The force of the crash was enough to rip the engine block apart. The fate of the crew is unknown. They may have been rescued or, like so many others, simply recorded as missing in action.
The chances are that the Lancaster our engine was fitted to entered service at the start of the Allied bombing campaign against Germany. The aim of the campaign was to destroy German industry and break the country's morale. The price, however, was high. Throughout the war, Bomber Command lost over 56,000 men. Aircrew had a mere 56% chance of survival. Odds worse than the trenches of World War I. The effectiveness of such bombing campaigns has been widely debated. The simple fact remains that many civilians were killed during both the Allied and Nazi bombing raids of World War II. And what now for the engine? Well, it will remain on display as a memorial to all those young men, pilots, navigators, engineers and crew who were told to do the job, and in thousands of cases gave the ultimate sacrifice.